So today we're exploring the best ways to build your brand and define your artistic trajectory. And I can't think of anybody in the electronic music field who's more suited to talk about this subject than our guest expert today, which is JoeySuki, and he's a international touring DJ and producer, and now he's an artist coach. And he's performed at festivals such as Tomorrowland and Creamfields, and has worked with Hardwell, as well as done remixes for the likes of Jennifer Lopez and Pitbull. He's now based in the southern Netherlands, and like I said, works as an artist coach. So welcome, Joey.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
So before we dive in, just to let everybody know on the call, there's a chat. And
Can I see the chat as well?
Yep. So if you do there's like a bubble and then like an ellipses. Yeah.
Stella Morrison, hi.
Yeah. Hey, Stella. Stella's on the Teknofonic label, so we have. Cool. So she's really cool. She's based in the UK. So everybody, type in the chat. Let us know where you're from, and if you have any questions as we go along, feel free to chat them in there. But we'll open the floor to a Q&A at the end. And those for watching the replay at teknofonic.com, feel free to email your questions to artists@teknofonic.com, and we'll be happy to help. So, Joey, so could you tell us a little bit about who you are and a little bit about your journey as an artist?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm Joey, as mentioned, also known as JoeySuki. I've been a DJ and producer for over, 10 years, I think for about 12 years now, 13 years. Started off DJing at people's home, like graduation parties and those kind of things. And eventually when I started making my own music, things started to grow. My career started to grow. And I ended up doing a lot of great things. I toured all over the world, like you mentioned. I did a collaboration with Hardwell about 4 or 5 years ago, I think. I did a lot of stuff with Firebeats, which are really doing well right now as well. I had my own label. Did a lot of stuff, like great time, until 2014, where I hit the bottom of my career. Well, actually the highest point of my career, but at the same time, personally, the lowest point, because I ended up in a burnout. And from that moment on, I started diving deeper in myself, and started asking the question to myself, like, hey, is this thing that I'm doing right now, traveling the world and not being at home that much, living from music, is this the thing I would like to do for the rest of my life? And I found out that the DJ life just wasn't for me. As in, I didn't like the lifestyle of a DJ. I was a DJ. I did all the things. I just didn't like it. And at that moment, to me, the most obvious choice was to quit. So I did. And until today, I'm still happy with that decision. So that's luckily, otherwise I would be bummed out. But I'm still happy that I decided to quit, because, like I said, it just didn't fit me as a person. Right now, because like quitting DJing, quitting your job, that's the easiest thing to do. You just say, fuck it, I'm done, and you're done. But then the big question comes on top of everything, which is, what am I going to do now? Because at that moment, I was 25 years old. Right now, I'm 30 years old. And when you're 25, you still have like at least 50, 60 years to go to work. So I started thinking, like, what's the thing that I like to do? What's the thing that gets me out of bed every morning? And what makes me happy? And then I started thinking, like, it's still music, it's still something music related, but I don't really feel like I want to work at a label or want to sit at a desk all day long. So I started trying out a few things, worked at a label for a while, and just did some regular stuff to find out what I liked and what I didn't like. And eventually I asked myself the question, what was the thing that I missed in my career? What's the thing that I could have used during my career? Could have maybe prevented the burnout, you never know. And then I started thinking, like, that was a coach, because at that moment I was with a career coach. That the guy helped me with finding my passion, that kind of things. So I started thinking, like, a guy like this isn't available in the music industry. Like, there isn't someone who you can just hire on an hourly rate because everyone has to pay percentages for managements, for fee,
Yep.
for bookers and stuff. So I started thinking, wow, this isn't there. So I started Googling, and it actually wasn't there. So I was like, whoa, okay, this is something. I'll dive deeper into it. So I started figuring out how I wanted to do that, and how I wanted to set it up. And I just started. That's the way I am. I don't think things through. I just go all in and see what happens.
Yeah.
And now, roughly 2 years ahead, it's been a full-time job for over a year, and it's been growing all the time. So it's really great for me to see that a lot of DJs, a lot of artists are interested in such a service. And I'm really happy to help them with my knowledge, my experience, and the network that I got. So it's like best of both worlds, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure, totally.
Yeah, so that's in a nutshell, like 12 to 15 years of my life.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, let's just dive in on this subject of branding, which you're as an artist coach, that's kind of one of the main things I know in working with you. And I actually, for those on the call, how I know Joey is I actually went to Amsterdam Dance Event, and I met Joey there for the first time, he's a super cool guy. So just right off the bat, I know like you know everything there is about branding, and kind of how do you set yourself apart as an artist. So I guess, so what the big thing when it comes to thinking about defining your brand is obviously I mentioned what makes you different, but it should be basically about your sound and how you communicate your story is key. But what are some of the key strategies as an artist coach that you advise your clients to employ to solidify their brands, and what are you seeing is working really well, and what are some of the things you tell them to stop right now? Don't do that.
Well, funny thing that you mentioned your sound, because of course that's important, but I think that's a bit overrated, as in there's not so many artists out there who really have a specific own sound. There's just a few of them which you can clearly point out, but the majority of artists don't really have their own sound, in my opinion. So what I'm really focusing on is social media, because I think I've been a DJ and an artist in an era where there was no internet. There was internet, but there was no social media and stuff. Now I sound really old, but there was. And I had to promote myself without social media. But now you have the opportunity to do it with social media. And I think that's the most easiest way to reach an audience and to build a brand. And if you build a strategy behind your own brand, you actually think things through, like how are you going to do it, what kind of content you're going to create, what you're going to post and what you're not going to post, because you can post literally anything. That's the problem I see with most of my clients. Mm-hmm. They struggle with their social media because they don't know what to post. And if you filter out a few of those things which fit you as a person and which fit your brand, that will make things way more easier for you, because it's more like filtered. It's easier for you to decide like, oh, hey, this fits my brand, this doesn't fit my brand. I try to work with 3 pillars. That's the way I work.
Excellent. So my background, actually, for a number of years, my day job was actually still in the arts, worked for a nonprofit called Chamber Music America as a membership manager and marketing, working in marketing. And one of the things, working with a bunch of different artists over the years in that capacity, before charting out on my own, with my own business, one of the things that we talk about as like arts marketers or whatever is this concept of with brand is what is your value proposition, which essentially is, as it kind of explains, like, but for businesses it's a little different, because your value proposition, your you're trying to explain why your product solves somebody's problems, or improves their situation, and kind of tells like their ideal customer why they should buy from you and not the competition. So as artists, we're not really selling a product per se. We're kind of selling an experience. So we kind of actually overlook what value we give to their fans. Like I make experimental dubstep. Well, that's not really a brand statement. So what tips do you have when it comes to defining who you are as an artist, and why should people even be interested in your music in the first place?
I think being different is overrated as well, because if you go look out for what makes you different, what makes you stand out, it's nothing, like everyone has been doing something. And if you play soccer, a million other people play soccer. I just believe that if you pick 3 things, 2 to 3 things, I think 3 things is the best, that are, that really explain who you are as a person. So with artists, most of the time, one of those things is music, right? Because you're an artist, so probably one of the pillars. And then you have to pick 2 others. And most of the time it's like, maybe it's food, or maybe it's workout, or maybe it's gaming or whatever. But if you pick 3 of these things and you keep posting stuff about it, I think, and I really believe in the power of repetition. It's the same as ads work, the more you see it, the more you start believing it. And if you start posting stuff regularly about gaming, or regularly about music, or regularly about food, people will eventually start noticing that you are that guy that talks about food, gaming, and music. For instance, I did something last year just for fun, just to show my clients how it worked and how crazy it is. I'm not sure if you follow me as well, but last summer, I love barbecuing. I just love barbecuing. And last summer we had a crazy summer here, so I decided to barbecue every day. And I posted just a short picture or video or something on my Instagram stories, not just 2 seconds, 3 seconds, but it gave you the imagination that I was barbecuing. And everyone that I came across on the street, or everyone that I met online, or clients came to me and said like, dude, you barbecue every day. It's like, yeah, that's because you see that I'm showing you that. But do you also know what I've been doing for the rest of my day? It's like, no, I've been to a workout, I've been doing this, I've been doing that. But that's not what I show you. So that's what you don't know. You only know what I show you. And that's the thing with building a brand. You decide what you show your fans. So if you decide to pick a certain subject and keep showing them that specific subject, the fans will actually start believing that that's your brand. I think another way to describe your brand is also your reputation. So imagine yourself standing in a room with 10 people, and the minute you leave the room, what's the thing that people are going to tell about you, like gossiping about you? That's your reputation. If that's the thing that matches with your 3 pillars, that's your brand.
Excellent. I really like that. So we touched a little bit about, with the repetition and everything. So what are some of the ways you can kind of like you mentioned, like the repetition and everything has kind of in line with your values and your brand identity that you defined. So how you present yourself is obviously the reflection of your identity. So what ways can you communicate your brand online and make it actually receptive to your fans? Like, do you kind of just go with something and experiment and see what works and what doesn't work? Or do you actually, is there a way to kind of figure out what the fans like? I guess what I'm trying to get at is should you define your brand based on what a potential audience wants, or just kind of be who you are,
I would stick to who you are. Yeah. Because if you decide to do something else, like that, something that doesn't really fit you as a person, you have to be able to build a brand consistently for over the next 10, 20 years. And if you're deciding to, let's say you don't like cooking food, you just hate cooking, and you decide to build a brand right now which includes cooking, and of course, the first week you can manage yourself to cook every day, but after 2 weeks you will start slacking, and after 1 month you just keep forgetting. But if you really like cooking, like me for instance, I like cooking. I cook every day, so it's not a problem for me to maintain that thing. So I think if you pick something that doesn't fit you as a person, it's going to be really hard to maintain it on the long term.
Yeah, for sure. So with all the social media platforms, like your website and the other platforms, there's obviously you were talking about Instagram and posting these pictures. There's a ton of content to create. How do you do it all, or should you do it all, or should you pick a platform that, I guess when you're picking a platform, how do you pick one that works for your brand?
I always think the way of what, how, where, and I'll explain. It starts with what are you selling? Well, as an artist, it's pretty easy because you're selling music, you're selling a product. Then the question becomes how you're going to sell it. Well, that has to do with the platforms that are available. So social media, you have iTunes, you have Spotify, all those platforms will help you sell your music. Then the question becomes where are you going to sell it? And I think the smartest question you should ask yourself is where is my audience based? So what kind of audience am I targeting on? If you create classical music, I wouldn't target 12-year-old kids, because they probably aren't interested in your music. I'm not saying they all aren't interested, but the majority will probably not be interested. And if you create dance music, then I wouldn't target people from 60 years and older. So it's just reverse engineering your audience. So start thinking about what would my ideal fan look like, and on which platform are they probably going to be.
Yeah, excellent. So let's see here. I had this question in my list of interview questions, and I don't remember where I was going with it, but I'm going to just throw it out there. What does it mean for a brand to be authentic?
Authentic.
Yeah.
It's just another. It's just one of
those
words,
hear that,
like.
Yeah,
it's just one of those words like identic, unique, those kind of things.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, so I think what I was going with that is like that's a throw word, like, authentic, unique. You hear that all the time in branding and like defining your brand. What are they actually trying to get at? Like when these gurus are saying that, like when you're thinking about as your artist, like how do I communicate who I am? And I guess I'd like to think of it maybe starting with the why. Like, why are you doing this? Do you have any tips for that of like, what kind of questions should you be asking yourself when you're doing this branding exercise, and kind of figuring out who you are and what you want to offer?
What kind of questions should you ask yourself? I don't really think you should think it's through like that, because if you're a company and if you're selling, let's go back to the beginning, because you touched a really important point there. You said that regular companies sell products and artists actually sell themselves. That's the truth. And in my opinion, that's what makes it so hard to sell yourself, because it's really hard to identify yourself. What makes me special and stuff. But I think if you pick out just 3 things that are regular to you, something regular to you could be something special to someone else. For instance, I've been a rock climber as a sport. I went rock climbing every day, like 4 times a week, something like that. To me, that was the most regular thing in my life, because it's just something that I did. But to other people, it was like, whoa, do you do rock climbing or whatever? You never know what's going to be special to someone else. So I would just pick 2 to 3 things that are like identical to you, that you like to do, that really makes you special. Because let's say you're really great in chess playing. I'm not great at chess playing, but if you're great at chess playing, to me, you're unique, right? You're special. But it's just the matter of pointing it out, like show people that you actually are a great chess player, because otherwise I don't know.
Right.
So it's all about what you show and what you don't show. But the words unique and the words authentic are a bit overrated, in my opinion.
Mm. Totally agree with that. Excellent. So I guess in a lot of artist interviews that I've heard in podcasts or watched on YouTube, there's like this reoccurring theme of seems to be like do what you love and the money will come. That's kind of easier said than done. So how when you're working with your clients, how do you advise them on engineering their success? In terms of whether that's, social media or paying more attention on, social media, or is there actually kind of like an overarching trajectory that you kind of, you mentioned the three pillars, but is there anything in more specific or any examples that you have with some artists that you work with?
Yeah, I think that quote, it kind of works, like, yeah, if you do something you love, you will be more successful with it than you do something you don't love, because you spend more energy in it, you spend more time doing it because you don't hate it. But the big pitfall that I see with artists is that they keep thinking and don't do. And of course, you can love what you do and you can keep making music all day long. But if you don't show it to the world, if you don't put it out on Spotify, if you don't put it out on social media, people will never find out about you. So making music is one thing, but the branding, the marketing, all those kind of things are definitely a part of your job as well. It's just not the fun part, but it is a part of your job.
Excellent. So I guess so let's fast forward a few years and once you've established your brand, and you've experienced this well, there's kind of like this danger of it defining you 24/7, 365 days a week.
Yeah.
Hardwell, for example, announced his retirement from DJing, recently, and he there's had an interesting quote: "Being Hardwell 24/7 leaves too little energy, love, creativity, and attention in my life as a normal person to do so." And you obviously experience this as well. So how do you establish your brand so you don't lose yourself in the process?
I think the best way to give an answer on that is to say that you're always in control. You always have the option to say no. And to me, that was the big mistake I made. I never said no. I tried to do everything. That's the reason why I burned out. I think that, well, not only artists, but more people, like younger people, just need to spend more time working on their brain. Like we know everything about our body, but we don't know that much about how we actually work from the inside. And as soon as you discover how your brain works and how it works for you personally, things will become way easier. And it's the same with when you have a big brand. For instance, with Hardwell, like he has a really big brand right now. Taking a step back doesn't kill him. It's just really hard to make that decision because for him, it feels like this big thing. And of course, the fans will be shattered. But I just really think it's for him, it's like, I really admire the fact that he made that decision because it's really hard to make a decision on that point in your career.
For sure. So when thinking about developing your brand, we kind of touched on a whole bunch of different aspects, and it, kind of get in this, it becomes overwhelming. So you end up not doing things. So what would you say is like the one thing you should do, or where should you even start? Like if you're new and you're just putting out music for the first time, just putting it up on Spotify isn't enough, or so
where would you start with branding, or where would you start as an artist?
Start with branding yourself as an artist.
Okay. Well, start with branding. I would take digestible pieces and don't get in on the highest level because that's not possible. Like a lot of people look at other people to see like how they are doing it or how they achieve all those things. But most of the time, those people are way like 8 steps before them, and you can't really measure yourself with them. So try to take things one at a time. If you are struggling with social media, don't expect yourself to post 5 times a day. It's not going to work. first start with once a day or once every 2 days, then add a few times a week, or go to 5 times a week, then go to 7 times a week, then go to 2 times a day. Try to train yourself and let yourself get used to being on social media and communicating in the way you are communicating. But don't expect yourself to dive in deep and one day to another you're this social media expert where you know how to brand yourself. It's something that takes time, and we're just all hoping that things will go way quicker than we hope. But yeah, some things just take time.
Yeah. So too many people think that branding begins with choosing an artist name and ends with like hiring a designer on Fiverr or somewhere to pop out some logo with, you know, a couple of your favorite colors on it. So your logo is not a brand. So what would you say are the components of a strong brand and its visual identity? So if you're thinking of like all your media assets and trying to put it together, what would you say are like kind of those components of that really of a strong brand, like that you see artists?
I think if you ask people that follow you on social media or who are a fan of you, if you ask them like what are the first 2 or 3 things that come on top of your mind when I say your artist name, if those two or three things match with your like brand identity, that's when you know you have a strong brand. The visual part is just to complement the how do you say that? It's just to complement how you would like to look. As in, some people just like to have sophisticated visuals. Some people like to have really colorful stuff. Other people like to go dark. That just depends on what kind of music you make, what kind of audience you talk to, and what you like personally, of course. But I don't think the visual part will be that special. Sometimes it is, if it's really special.
Scanning through my questions here.
You know, one thing I want to touch base on as well is the thing you named with the artist names, because that's one of those things that I notice a lot with other artists as well. Like, they're getting stuck on picking their artist name.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, like, the thing with brands is, I always compare it with Apple. If you think about it, it's a brand named Apple, like this fruit thing that you can eat. That's the weirdest thing, right? Why would you call your brand? That's the same thing as I start a new company tomorrow and call it Banana.
Yeah.
And people will accept it immediately. No, that's not going to happen. It takes time. So what defines a brand name? The brand name is created by the things you do as a brand. So Apple started creating great products, great phones, great laptops. And that's the reason why if we think of Apple, we don't think of an apple anymore that we eat. No, we think of computers and phones. And it's the same with your artist brand. If you just pick a name, doesn't matter what name. In the beginning, it's always weird. Always. Will always be weird. Until you start releasing music. And then after a year or something, you will notice that it's starting to become natural. Because now people connect the music with your brand and not necessarily the person or whatever.
Yeah. So that's you bring up an interesting point with an artist named. So I guess a lot of artists that I've worked with have have questioned, like, should I have like a name, or should I go by my own name? What would you recommend they do in that sense? Like, if they're struggling with coming up with their name, should they just go with their personal name, or spend some time figuring out what their name should be?
That depends. If you pick, the problem with your personal name is that to me personal, it's too private. As in, it's too easy to find a lot of stuff about my private life if you know my normal name. Aside from that, my normal name isn't the easiest one international scene, so it's not that easy. But sometimes it works, if you don't really mind that your private life is out there, or it's really personal. Sometimes it doesn't matter to pick your personal name, and sometimes, like I said, the name doesn't really matter. It's just your personal opinion if you'd like to use your own name or if you'd like to use an alias. For me, I picked an alias because my my own name, a lot of people don't know how to write it. And I think that's one important thing. If you pick a name, make sure people all over the world know how to write it.
Yeah, or do what I did and reserve the domain, the alternate spellings of the domain name.
Yeah, exactly. So people end up, the search engines right now are so immense, are so great. So it's almost impossible to not get found if you release music and use an artist name. But sometimes some artist names are so ridiculously hard to spell, I can't even find them. So that's the only thing I would really think about if you pick a name. How does it end up if someone from Russia is going to look for me?
That's pretty much all I had in terms of the predetermined questions for the interview. So I guess I wanted to open up the floor to some questions here and see what we have going. Stella, you mentioned you didn't use your personal name to prevent mixing with your personal life. Yeah. With your day job. Yeah, that's a good point. Do you want people to, because LinkedIn comes up in search engines, right? So
everything comes up, like maybe even your birth certificate or whatever, everything comes up. And it's not that everything's safe or whatever, because if you Google my name, you still find out what my real name is or where I live or whatever. You can still find it if you want, but it's just a bit harder than normal. And some people, if they really want to know, they will find out. But I just don't really like the fact if everyone knows my regular name.
Mm-hmm. So we have a question. How do you pick a story for your brand?
How do you exactly mean that? Like, what do you mean with a story for your brand? I can imagine, like, if you really have a particular brand. So let's say I have this client who has a fictional kind of brand. So he doesn't want to be marketed with his own face. He uses like, how do you say that? Comic kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
And in that way, I can definitely think of a story, because then you have to create a fictional thing. And then you have to think of a story. But I think if you use your own face, your own life, I wouldn't use a story.
Good question.
Because the story, like your path from where you are right now to where you're going to be in the next year, that's going to be your story, and that's what you're going to show on Instagram stories and on Instagram and on Snapchat and on Facebook. You actually take them on the ride with you towards the path, towards your next goal. And that should be your story. So that could also be sitting at a meeting at 10 a.m. or being in the studio at 7 p.m. or it doesn't really matter, as long as you take them on that ride and show them what you're doing, so they can actually have a peek inside your life and see, like, hey, he's doing this right now, or hey, he's eating that, or she's in a meeting right now. People are looking for connections, and if you give them reasons to connect with you, that works. I hope that answers your question.
So that actually reminds me. So if you're, with the subject of telling a story, I mean, it in your opinion, I mean, like, it's interesting because our market is so oversaturated with music, and you were mentioning earlier that it's very difficult for like an artist to have like their own unique sound or whatever like that, if that even exists anymore. So would you say, at this point in where we are in the music industry and where we are just in music in general and specifically electronic music, is it less about, obviously you want to have quality music, right? But is at the end of the day, is it really about like everything else other than just the music? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Are people really, when you're defining your brand and the concept of branding is like telling that story of who you are. So I guess how do you juggle the two things, like between,
that's a
music,
good question, because the problem is the one can go without the other. And of course, as an artist, you need to have music because that's the thing you do. But on the other hand, you don't need music, because with branding and with marketing, that's well, kind of the only thing that almost matters right now, and your network. But wow, I see a big question coming. And anyway, where was I? Focus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So music isn't necessarily the most important thing, and the problem is you need to have music to get to the next level. But without branding, marketing, and networking, it's almost impossible to get to the next level. So yes, you need to have music, but it's definitely not the most important part of your career.
For sure. Yeah. That's what I was getting at. So I guess, so what's interesting too is, though, at the same token, like with, going kind of flipping that, I think what I'm noticing of the successful artists that have longevity, is that it's the marriage of between the two, right? So you have
It's the balance.
it's the quality product and the experience. So I mean, like, you can have awesome branding, but if your product sucks, that's the fastest way to like go out of business, right? So
Exactly.
So the same, for us as artists too, So
and that's why I say the one can go without the other. As in, you can brand yourself all you want, but if your music sucks, you will never get there. But in the other way, it's also the other way around.
Yeah.
Like if your music is the best thing out there, but your branding sucks, it's also not going to work. So you need to find an ultimate balance between those two things. You need to find this way for yourself where you can actually brand yourself, market yourself, be in the studio to create great music as well, and find that balance in between those things in your career.
Yeah. So let's take James' question here. The big one. So let's see here. A lot of DJs do not have a distinct sound. Yeah. Well, but there seems something is still missing. There's some small exceptions, but I feel like most fans just care about music and discover as an artist based on his or her music and nothing related to what the artist does. 99 of my top 100 producer DJs, I couldn't tell you anything about them besides their music. So why is it that some artists take off versus other artists with equally good music and branding? Is it just about networking or having money for marketing, or is there something else that I'm missing? I think, going back to what we were saying, the marriage of the two. But, I guess if you're, thinking of looking and see it when you're doing your own branding research, like you obviously looking at what other artists are doing, and then you look at them and then you're like, well, I don't get it, but they're still,
The thing is, branding only becomes interesting when you already have the attention of your fan. So you need to take one step back, and that's what he's talking about. You need to get the attention of the fan first, because if you don't have attention, if you don't have a set of eyes of someone watching at your Instagram account, why would the photos and the videos matter, right? So you need to go one step back, and you first need to get that attention of the fans. You first need to build a fan base. And I think that's one of the reasons why some artists go off and some artists don't. Some artists are just really strategic with releasing their music, and they have a strong network, so they know how to get in with big labels who have big promotional channels, who have big DJ promos, and that's what's going to boost the basis of your career. And as soon as you go through that thing, that's where branding becomes interesting, because that's when you start to have a fan base. But the branding is like step number 5 or something. With people, like with artists, most artists are creative and have a lot of emotion, but they don't necessarily are strategic and business minded. And I think that's one of the problems why a lot of artists are struggling with these things, because making music is a creative thing, but branding and marketing and all those kind of things, it's a different job, like it's like a completely different thing. But in the beginning, when you don't have the financial resources yourself, you need to do it all on your own. And it's almost impossible, because you can't do everything on your own. And I just think that's interesting, because a lot of artists are struggling with this same problem.
So I see artists having a distinct look on them. Is it beneficial to develop a certain look for yourself as an alongside your brand?
Yeah, it could be because some people might recognize you. Remember the thing I told, like if you're in a room and you walk out, the thing that the people talk about at that moment, your reputation. If you wear certain kind of clothes, that's something people will start talking about. Like for instance, if you always wear black clothes, that's something people will notice. If you have a look at Don Diablo, he customizes his own clothing with his own logo on it.
Mm-hmm.
People will notice that, and people will not notice it if you do it once. People will notice it if you do it for a year.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, you know, like don't try it just once. If you want to make something, if you want to build a brand, be consistent with the thing that you're planning to do, because people will only find out if you start repeating it.
Oh, yeah. How much time should be allotted to social media versus music production?
um Social media, in my opinion, is something that you can do on the go. So it's not necessarily something you should sit back for 1 hour a day and work on social media. As an artist, you show them your process, you show them your story. So it's actually all about those 1 minute posts, those 10 seconds, those 2 seconds that are going to tell your story about what you're working on at that moment. So it's not like you should spend 1 hour a day on social media or 2 hours. You should just make sure it's integrated in your life and in your process, and you think about social media as soon as you are doing something that is worth notifying. So I don't think there's a certain amount of time that you should spend on social media. I think you should get used to the fact to notice it when you have to be on it and when you have to post something.
Oh,
Is there
service that can help with artists. Somebody to manage this on my behalf. Oh, that's kind of like a good point. It's like I did this myself. Like I hired like a consult. This was like early on in my career, so I hired a consultant or a PR person to kind of do my brand essentially, or rebrand myself as an artist, because I was having a really hard time struggling. Well, I was really struggling with how do I reconcile the two distinct areas of my music. So my background is as a classical musician. So I'm a classically trained pianist and composer, and so I write for classical music for chamber ensembles. But then I have like my electronic persona, the Sonic Fear, which is more of the electronic IDM world. So so I was having to struggle, like, how do I differentiate those two brands, and like, or should I bring them together and stuff like that? So I actually hired somebody to figure that out for me, and then I ended up being like a complete waste of money, to be honest, because I find like she told me everything that I already needed to know. But I guess the point is like, the point, I guess the point is like, when do you decide like when it's right time to like hire somebody to do this for you versus trying to figure out how to do this all yourself?
To jump into that thing, because I think it's a really important question. Yes, there probably are a lot of services that can help you with this, but the thing is, I don't really believe in that an artist can outsource this. Why? That's the difference between a normal company and being an artist. As an artist, people want to see you. They don't want to see like covers of artworks or maybe posters where you're DJing or whatever. That's not the thing they're interested in, because that's just making advertisements. The reason why people start following you as an artist is because they like you as a person. They like to see you and what you're up to. And that's not something a branding agency can do for you, because you have to be there on the spot.
Yeah.
And that's something that changed in the social media age in the last few years. Like 5 years ago, it was easy because you could start planning things beforehand. But right now, social media is more about the now. What are you doing right now? Not what are you going to do tomorrow or what did you do yesterday? No, what are you doing now? It's either live shows. It's the same as this webinar, like it's live. We're actually sitting here. We're engaging with your questions, and it's the same with artists. If I see a picture from you that you just landed in the States, I assume that you're actually there.
Yeah.
Right? It's gonna be weird if I post a picture like, oh, I'm in the States and I'm already back home. That doesn't suit the social media environment anymore. Things changed. It's just all about the now. And I think it's really hard for a company to outsource that for you.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think the outsourcing comes in like managing like either like the posts for you or something like a time. It's more of like a time management thing as opposed to actually hiring somebody to kind of develop your brand. So
yeah, and of course that you can go to services to brainstorm about your brand to see if they can build a brand with you, and maybe they can work on content with you or whatever stuff that they can plan ahead. But the most important part of your social media is the part of you. Like, what are you doing right now, and who do you chill with, and what do you eat, and that's the thing people are interested in. That's the story they want to see, and that's not something an agency or a service can bring you. Antanas, sometimes I stop myself from posting something because I think that people will not find it interesting, and it will become sort of filler. Do you have any tips what content desire more on social media? Interesting point. Let me ask you this. Who decides what's interesting and what's not? That's a big question to me, and the same thing goes for your music. Who decides if your music is good or if it's not? For instance, let's go back to the rock climbing thing. If I post a photo of me rock climbing, maybe 90% of my followers won't even care about it, but 10% would, and 10% starts engaging with me on that photo. Next time, if I post a photo of my studio, 80% will probably not care about it, but 20% will. The thing is, you never know who's gonna like your content. It's just a matter of trial and error.
Yeah, and I find what's very helpful too is, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier about having that fan persona or that avatar that you kind of actually you can have several of these like personas that you're like trying to say, if I'm going to put out this piece of content, is this person going to respond to it? So, but then it's kind of like that dichotomy of like what's authentic to yourself versus like, am I just posting this just to be filler or whatever?
And the thing also is that Antanas mentioned that she stopped herself from posting something. What if that post was the post to your next step? And you didn't find out because you didn't post it?
So we have just a few minutes left, so maybe time for one or two more questions.
I think another thing that has to do with stopping yourself from posting something has to do with overthinking. One of the things that kills a lot of stuff for artists as well. That's what I mentioned before as well. Get out of your head and start doing stuff, because a lot of people want to get answers to something that you just simply can't get answers to until you do it. And social media is one of the things. You just have to try and find out what works for you and what doesn't. Of course, it's useful if it has to do something with your brand. So if it has something to do with those pillars that we talked about. Because then you stay in your lane. But between those lanes, there's a lot of movement possible, like maybe live shows could work for you. Maybe cooking shows could work. Like Marshmallow, for instance, he has a cooking show. It's a DJ. He has a cooking show. He has like millions of play on a cooking show. Who could have imagined, It's just a matter of trial and error and see what works and what resonates with your audience and what doesn't.
A lot of Instagram has become bot driven. How would you recommend getting attention through that? Oh, yeah.
Through that, yeah. I wouldn't look too much to how many likes you got as a page. I think most of us will probably know what kind of answers are being posted as bots and which ones aren't. All the thumbs up and stuff, that's like bots. We all know that, I think. So I think the most important here is that you don't fool yourself and don't trick yourself. And yeah, you probably know when you have like 10,000 followers and you know 5,000 of them are bots, you're only fooling yourself. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but how would you recommend getting attention through that? Yeah, I definitely would not use them. I definitely would not use bots because you're just fooling yourself. But I don't see why a bot would stop you from getting attention.
Yeah, it's like I guess just engaging, like you say, well, you'll know which ones are authentic engagements versus the ones that are bots, and actually engage with the ones that are engaging with you. Like you don't want to respond to a thumbs up, but you want to respond to someone saying, hey, that I really loved that, and told the story behind it, or like actually left you a legitimate comment. So
I see James just posted what he actually meant. He means how to get attention using bots. I mean, getting attention, getting past the noise of the bots. I think the only way to get around with that is try to engage on a personal level and try to engage with the content. So, for instance, if we post, let's say we post this talk that we just had, you can post a thumbs up or you can post a smiley, but that's saying nothing. If you post something underneath my Instagram post, which will say, hey, Joey, interesting point you had about this and that subject. I think this and this will also work. I will probably comment on that because that's something that engages with the content that I posted and that's interesting. But if you just post a thumbs up that has nothing to do with the content that I'm posting, why would I interact with you? So I think if you start engaging with the content itself, like with the subject of the content itself, it's more interesting to start engaging with other people as well.
Great question. So we're just about out of time. So I just wanted to say, thanks again, Joey, for coming on the show, so to speak.
Thanks for having me.